Anthropology is a broad discipline of humanity. It studies man and his activities, starting from dim remote period to the present position. It has three main branches. They are physical anthropology, cultural or social anthropology, and archaeology. Archaeology is primarily concerned with the study of antiquities. Archaeology is again divided into three major sections. They are prehistoric archaeology, protohistoric archaeology, and historical archaeology, and many subsections. In today's session, we will talk on archaeology, focusing on one of its major sections, that is prehistoric archaeology. Prehistoric archaeology studies man and his work before the existence of written records. It tells us a story of a region or a country, people or race prior to writing. It may also be defined as an account of the illiterate or pre-literate people of society. Historical archaeology depends on written records or documents. These study literate people and their works. Protohistoric archaeology bridges the gulf between the prehistoric and historic archaeology. It studies ancient literate people. Now, let's talk about nature of prehistoric archaeology. The nature of prehistoric archaeology is partly discovery of treasures of the past, partly the meticulous work of the scientific analysis, and partly the exercise of the creative imagination. For instance, it is toiling in the sun or an excavation. It is working with living Eskimos to record the living traditions in the snows of Alaska, or it is even diving down to the ancient ruins of Dwarka of the western coast of India and Gujarat, or the Spanish wrecks of the coast of Florida, and it is even investigating the ancient civilization of India, that is Harappan civilization, or China, that is Yangshao culture, or America, that is Folsom culture. Moreover, it is also the painstaking task of interpretation so that we understand what these things meant in the past human society. In this way, prehistoric archaeology is both a physical activity out in the field, either for exploration work or excavation process, or both, and intellectual pursuit in the study, analyzing the collected materials in the laboratory, and writing a report on the finds. It is an exciting quest, the quest for knowledge about the early man that existed in the distant past. Prehistoric archaeologists study the societies of the ancient people primarily through their material remains. For instance, the habitational areas like open air stations, caves, rock shelters, pits, huts, lake-dwelling sites, etc. Tools, weapons, implements or decorative pieces, art objects which include paintings and engraving works and other artifacts that constitute what is known as a material culture left by early man. And the most challenging task for prehistoric archaeologists is to know how to interpret the past material culture in human terms. Many questions startle prehistoric archaeologists or prehistorians. Who were they? What did they eat? How did they make stone, bone, antler, and conch shell tools? How were these tools and pots used? How were societies organized? What was the environment look like? What contact did they have? What did they think? How did things change? To answer all these questions, prehistoric archaeologists study the material culture left by the forerunners from different angles by using or applying the methods of natural and physical sciences such as geology, geography, paleontology, paleobotany, archaeogeology, climatology, pedology, archaeological chemistry, etc. In addition, they also develop a new idea to reconstruct the past lifestyle by using the knowledge of ethnography in conjunction with surviving archaeological remains. Hence, the prehistoric archaeologists work like the ethnographers. They live among the non-industrialized communities, but with a specific purpose of understanding how such societies use material culture, how they construct their huts or settlements, why some huts are round and others square or rectangular, where they constructed, and so on. Now, let's look at the relationship between prehistoric archaeology and history. Prehistoric archaeology deals with the past culture. In the broadest sense, just as prehistoric archaeology is a section of archaeology, so too is a part of history, which comprised the whole history of humankind from its beginning over 3 million years ago. According to Colin Renfrew and Paul Behan, the conventional history sources begin only with the introduction of written records around 3000 BC in Western Asia and considerably later in most other parts of the world. Then the question arises, how is the history of illiterate or pre-literate people or country known? What are or can be its sources? A prehistoric archaeologist answers that anything that tells us its past history, say for example, language, place, and the study of people's physical features, customs and manners, legends and traditions, their monuments, even a study of landforms, soils and vegetation, and the animals may help to illustrate the story. A commonly drawn distinction, therefore, is that prehistoric archaeology is a period before written records, and history is a study of the past using written documents. Prehistoric archaeology contributes a great deal of understanding of those periods and places where written records, inscriptions, and other literary sources do not exist. It is a duty of the prehistoric archaeologists to explore, excavate, analyze, and interpret the evidence. Even though prehistoric archaeology tells the history of pre-literate people, it differs from history proper. The artifacts or ecofacts, whatever explorer excavated, do not tell us anything without proper analysis and interpretation. It is the prehistoric archaeologist who has to make sense of these finds. In this respect, he works like a scientist. He collects evidences or data, conducts either experiments or formulates hypotheses, that is, a proposition to account for the data, tests hypotheses against more data, and in conclusion, devises a model or a description that seems best to summarize the pattern observed in the data. Now, let's talk about the aims and objectives of prehistoric archaeology. The aim of prehistoric archaeology is to learn about the human past. It aims at recovering as much as possible about the history of the illiterate societies. It is a social study concerned not with the individuals or with the relations of individuals to one another and to society in general, but with the societies and the interrelationship between them and the natural world. It enables us to understand the economic aspect of man. It creates interest in geology, in understanding the knowledge of geological laws, that is, forming the stratas. It also creates interest in geography, in creating awareness of the places, as it involves the investigation of the existing as well as the former conditions of climate, topography, soil, vegetation, and animal life, all of which can be reconstructed with the help of physical environment in which the archaeological remains are preserved. It calls for understanding of the complex relation between human societies and physical environments. The objective of prehistoric archaeology is to reconstruct or piece together the past lifeways of the pre-literate ancient communities with the help of their material remains. It takes interest in having a clear picture of how people lived and how they exploited their environment. It also seeks to understand why they lived in that way, why they had that pattern of behavior, and how their lifeways and material culture came to take the form they did. It takes interest in the cultural formation processes or sea transforms with a view of detailed explanation. Now, let's see about scope. The scope of prehistoric archaeology is very wide. Today, this section has become an institution encompassing number of different scholars forming subdisciplines. Each scholar formulates new theories and follows different methods, having diverse approaches. The chronological division between archaeology of the long prehistoric period and that of the historic times is accentuated by further subdivisions, so that prehistoric archaeologists specialize either in the earliest period, that is, the Paleolithic or the Old Stone Age, or Early Stone Age that existed from 2 to 3 millions of years ago and continues up to 10,000 years BC, or late but earlier periods, that is, the Mesolithic or the Middle Stone Age, or recent periods, or Neolithic or New Stone Age that existed between 7000 BC and 3000 BC, or more recent period, that is, Chalcolithic, which range from 3000 BC to 2000 BC, or the most recent periods, that is, the Bronze Age. The first Indian civilization, called the Harappan civilization, flourished between 3250 BC and 1450 BC. One of the major developments in the last 5 decades has been the realization that prehistoric archaeology has much to contribute, not only to the study of the antiquities or relics of the past people or societies, but also to study the modern people or contemporary societies with simple technology from the light of their practices shed on prehistoric times. It can also help with specific archaeological studies when the ways of life of the modern society are sufficiently similar to those of the past life. For instance, megalithism, a dead cultural phenomenon in some parts of the world, is still practiced by tribal communities in northeast India, particularly in Manipur, Meghalaya, and Nagaland. Hence, many scholars who are specialized in the field of ethnoarchaeology take keen interest to reconstruct the past lifeways of the ancient people in the light of these living traditions. Now, let's see about the different approaches in prehistoric archaeology. First is ethnoarchaeology. Ethnoarchaeology has become a major specialization in modern archaeology, and we realize that we can only understand the archaeological remains or records if we understand in detail how it came about or how it was formed. Site formation processes are now a focus of intensive study. It is here that ethnoarchaeology has come into its own, the study of living people and their material culture, undertaken with the aim of improving our understanding of the archaeological remains or records. For example, the study of butchery practices among the living hunter-gatherers undertaken by Louis Binford among the Nunavut Eskimo of Alaska has given him many new ideas about the way of archaeological remains or relics that may have been formed, allowing him to re-evaluate the bone remains of animals eaten by very early humans elsewhere in the world. Another approach is environmental archaeology. It is an interdisciplinary approach where archaeologists and specialists from other sciences study the human use of plants and animals and how societies adapted to the ever-changing environment. It views the human animal as part of the natural world, interacting with other species in the ecological system. With a few exceptions, little attention was paid by archaeologists to eco-factual evidence until recent decades. It is now regarded as important to see sites in their setting and to consider the geomorphological and biological processes occurring in and around them, to determine whether the context belongs to a glacial or an interglacial phase and what the temperature is likely to have been in that part of the globe. Sea level and other questions will be related to this one. The next logical step is to turn to the faunal remains and the first place to the microfauna, including insects, snails and rodents, all of which are very sensitive indicators of climatic change. Some of these conditions, of course, resulted from human activity when people erected structures and otherwise influenced the immediate surroundings to ensure survival and comfort. Owing to the poor preservation of many forms of evidence and the distorted samples we recover, we can never arrive at the true facts for past environments. One simply has to aim at the best approximation available. No single method will give an adequate picture, for all are distorted in one way or another. Despite these difficulties, the task of environmental reconstruction is a fundamental one. The third approach, marine archaeology. Marine archaeology or underwater archaeology is another field of specialization demanding great courage and skill. It is generally considered to have been given its first major impetus during the winter of 1853 to 1854, when a particularly low water level in the Swiss lakes laid bare enormous quantities of wooden posts, pottery, and other artifacts. From the earliest investigation using crude diving bells, it has developed into a valuable complement to work on land. It encompasses a wide variety of sites, including wells, sinkholes, and spring. For example, the great sacrificial well at Chichel, Itza, which is in Mexico. Submerged lakeside settlements, for example, those of the Alpine region, and marine sites ranging from shipwrecks to sunken harbors, for example, Caesarea in Israel, and downed cities, for example, Port Royal in Jamaica and Dwarka in India. In the last 50 years, it has become a highly scientific exercise, yielding time capsules from the past in the form of shipwrecks and other structures that shed new light on ancient life as well as on land. The invention in recent time of miniature submarines, other submersible craft, and above all of scuba diving gear has been of enormous value, enabling divers to stay underwater for much longer time and to reach sites at previously impossible depths. As a result, the pace and scale of discovery have greatly increased over the last few decades. In this session today, we discuss about prehistoric archaeology and its many sub-disciplines or sub-branches and even different approaches of prehistoric archaeology. In conclusion, we can say that prehistoric archaeology embraces the whole range of human activity and accords them equal attention. It takes interest in all humankind which has ever lived anywhere in the world. In short, it studies the total record of humanity.